Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Little Book of LGBTQ+, An A to Z of Gender and Sexual Identities, by Harriet Dyer. Narrated by Amy Deuchler. Publisher's note: this audiobook may refer to visual elements included in the print and ebook editions of the book. Introduction. Hello there. Welcome to this introduction to useful LGBTQ+ terminology. Whether you are LGBTQ+ or an ally, there can be a lot of terminology to get to grips with. Thankfully, society is becoming more progressive, but we still have a long way to go. As it develops, words and phrases gain subtleties that are useful to know. There might also be a few areas of gender and sexuality you want to learn more about. In this book, I've tried to include the most up-to-date thinking on gender, sexuality, and identity. If this book helps you understand a few new things, great. And if you read something that doesn't seem quite right to you, then please let me know at auntie@summersdale.com. Meanings develop all the time, so if I've got something wrong, I want to improve on it for next time. Look, this isn't new stuff. Yes, the fact that so many people are discussing things like this openly is pretty new. But the identities aren't new. The feelings aren't new. The ways people want to identify and live and love aren't new. Make no mistake, people have been living and loving all sorts of ways since the beginning of people. We've just got a few more words to use now. And that's pretty cool. Little note. LGBTQ+ has been used throughout. There are lots of great arguments in favor of using different variations of the acronym, but for the purposes of ease and quick understanding, LGBTQ+ has been the acronym of choice in this introductory book. Warning: there are some examples of discriminatory language in the book that may be upsetting to the reader. Sex versus gender. At points, you might feel like you need a dictionary just to read this dictionary. After all, although some phrases may be new to you, others will be words you learned at school, but not with the same definitions you're familiar with. You might well be confused. Like I said in the introduction, this is all a learning process. To help you along the way, we're going to have a quick dive into one of the key questions you might have when listening to this book. Aren't sex and gender the same thing? Spoiler alert, no. It's understandable how we may have developed this view. Sex is explored in dusty, easily forgotten biology classes, and we're never really taught much about gender at all. In casual conversation, sex and gender tend to be used interchangeably. In fact, sex and gender do not have the same definition. Sex is a scientific term referring to your biology. Humans are generally categorized into two sexes, male and female. Intersex will be explored later. Your sex is defined by sex characteristics, including genitals, sex organs, hormones, and secondary characteristics like height, weight, and hair distribution. Although, to be honest, all that happens for those of us not born into a scientific study is that a medical professional will confirm your sex at birth by checking your genitals, and then it's up to you to discover the rest as you get older. The full definition of sex will be discussed later. Gender, on the other hand, is your internal experience of your identity. It's not what your body looks like or acts like, it's how you feel. Your gender expression will reflect that. Society, being as it is, there are informal checklists for this too. For example, Clothing is often gendered, which is something that we have become conditioned to think is normal. But even some more ridiculous items are unnecessarily gendered, such as pens for women. Throughout various cultures, some professions are thought to be masculine and some to be feminine. For an easy way to distinguish between the two, you could say that sex is the body and gender is the mind. Now, of course, it's possible to ask even more questions about sex and gender. There are entire academic careers built around exploring the definitions of sex and gender, in fact. For example, there are arguments that sex is also a social construct. If you're interested in learning more about this, then it's definitely worthwhile reading up about it. Keep listening through the end of this book for useful links, and a list of books that go into more detail than we have scope for in this dictionary. Because this book is trying to introduce as much as possible, it would be hard to delve deeper and still keep everything as accurate and clear as we'd like. Therefore, for the purposes of the Little Book of LGBTQ+, we'll be keeping the definition of sex as a biological one. Romance versus sexuality. Here's another distinction that's useful to have in mind when listening to this book. Sex and romance aren't the same thing. I know. This is the debate upon which 1,000 grown-worthy sitcoms and rom-coms have hinged. But it simply isn't the same thing. There are many people in the world who don't have to take into account the difference between romantic and sexual attraction. They experience romantic and sexual attraction at the same time, and often to one gender. For example, if someone were to identify themselves to you as heterosexual, they wouldn't usually go on to explain that they also felt romantic attraction towards people of a different sex. We'd take it for granted. And because there are so many people who experience romantic and sexual attraction as one, their voices tend to be the loudest. Because of this, we might assume that this is the case for everyone. But it's not. For some of us, who we want to sleep with is different to who we want to be in a relationship with. For others, they don't want to sleep with anyone, but they still want a sweetheart by their side. For yet others, a relationship isn't for them, but they do enjoy an active sex life, or would like to. Because there are so many different ways a person can experience attraction, it's important to establish the distinctions from the start. A quick guide is, sexual attraction is the desire to have sex or do sexy things with a person. Romantic attraction is an emotional attraction to another person, sometimes the desire to have a relationship with them. It's the hand-holding, date-going stuff. As with the sex versus gender section, there are more subtleties and complexities than this book can hope to cover. If you think you want to learn more, please check the reading list and links at the end. Gender pronouns. Sex, gender, love, and romance? A few minutes in, and we've already tackled some of the biggest, bafflingest subjects out there. So instead of going bigger, let's go small. Let's look at some of the smallest, most frequently used words in the English language. Pronouns. Tiny but mighty, pronouns are some of the building blocks of language. They help us make clear who we're talking about, who said the thing, who did the thing, who is the thing. But the little habits and assumptions need to be challenged just as much as the big ideas. The problem with our language is that many of its pronouns lock you into the gender binary. Him, her doesn't adequately represent some people's gender expression. Even if someone does use the pronouns him or her, if they're guessing their new acquaintance's gender, they may guess wrong. It's a potential minefield, both for the person who doesn't wish to give offense and the person who is stuck having to correct an otherwise cool new friend in order to correct a misconception. But there are ways around this. One is using new gender-neutral pronouns like ze and zir. Another is sticking to an old gender-neutral pronoun, they. Grammar pedants, who think this pronoun should only be used when speaking about more than one person, won't like this, but tough cookies, because humans are greater than grammar. Yes, I said it. The third and best option is simply asking someone, "What are your pronouns?" when you meet them. Yes, it might feel awkward at first, but most new meetings are awkward. If you can survive the "will we hug or handshake as hello" dilemma, you can survive using 4 words to make someone feel more comfortable. If that still seems too fussy, why not take it back to good old-fashioned courtesy, where the first rule is kindness and treating others the way they wish to be treated. A. Abrosexual. Someone whose sexual orientation is not fixed and changes often. It would not be accurate to say, for example, that an abrosexual person is gay one day and bisexual the next, as their sexual identity remains abrosexual. Instead, they would, for example, experience sexual attraction to people of the same gender as them one day and to people of other genders the next. Ace. 1. Short for asexual. 2. A person who identifies as asexual. Ace spectrum. The range of asexual identities. Because there isn't just one way to be asexual, to not feel and or have never felt sexual attraction, it's useful to think of all sexuality as a ruler and asexuality as a set of points on that scale. For example, one person may rarely feel sexual attraction and only sometimes have sex and identify as asexual. Another person may have never felt sexual attraction and identify as asexual. This may change over their lifetime or remain the same. Aceflux/aeroflux. A person who identifies on the ace spectrum. Their identity is fluid. Their level of sexual attraction or urges is changeable. Affirm. A positive confirmation that what has been said has been heard and believed. Affirmation is a word that has existing uses outside of the LGBTQ+ community, but carries extra weight within the community. It not only signals hearing and understanding, but also that the words are welcome and accepted as truth. Many people within minority groups have experienced doubt and invalidation when sharing their stories. For example, "love the sinner, hate the sin," or "are you sure you can't just not be this way?" Half acceptance like this hurts, so the act of affirmation is incredibly powerful. Agender. Someone who does not identify as any particular gender, or genderless. Alloromantic. Someone who has the urge and or inclination to have romantic relationships with other people. Allosexual. Someone who has sexual urges and feels sexual attraction towards other people. This can be a useful term that identifies the other end of the spectrum to asexuality. Identifying and naming opposite sexuality helps to move thinking from normal libido versus asexual libido, which implies the asexual drive is abnormal or other, to we are all related on the sexual spectrum. Ally. A person who supports a group without being part of that group themselves. Androgyne. 1. A person who is ambiguously gendered. This is actually the older form of the word androgynous. As with all identities, Androgynes operate on a spectrum. All experience a mix of genders, some who identify as more man than woman, others more woman than man, and yet others who may identify as entirely neutral. 2. Someone who presents as ambiguously gendered. This is their gender expression and may not reflect their gender identity. For example, someone may identify as a woman and choose to style themselves ambiguously with clothes, hair, makeup, etc. Androgyne romantic. Romantic attraction to people who are androgynous. Androgyne sexual. Sexual attraction to people who are androgynous. Androgynous. Ambiguously gendered in appearance. This can refer to physical characteristics such as hair or build, and also gender expression, such as clothes or makeup. Apora gender. Apora is from the Greek apor, meaning separate, so can be translated as separate gender. Apora gender people have a strong feeling that they are gendered, while not identifying as male, female, or any gender between those two on the gender spectrum. Appropriation. Taking something from a culture from which one did not originate and using it without proper thought, credit, or permission. Appropriation becomes negative when a dominant culture uses an element or elements of a community's culture, specifically a minority community, and exploits or fetishizes that culture or reduces the element or elements to fancy dress. A common example of this is when a white person wears a Native American headdress to a festival. Although it's intended as fun dress-up, Native American headdresses have religious or spiritual meanings and are intended to be worn by specific tribes in specific circumstances and/or by specific people. Aro or aro. 1. Short for aromantic. 2. Someone who identifies on the aromantic spectrum. Aromantic. Someone who does not feel the urge or inclination to be in a romantic relationship with other people. An aromantic person may identify as sexual and enjoy sexual relationships. Asexual. Someone who does not usually feel sexual attraction or a sexual urge towards other people. Asexuality works on a spectrum, like sexuality. Some people who consider themselves to be asexual never feel sexual attraction or urges. Others do on occasion. Some are averse to any sexual touch or interaction. Others engage in it on occasion to please their partners or themselves. An asexual identity doesn't have to stem from a revulsion against sex. Some asexual identities simply don't find sex interesting, fulfilling, or important. B. By erasure. The act of belittling, demeaning, or obscuring the existence of bisexual people. Common biphobic assumptions include that if a man comes out as bisexual, it is a stepping stone to admitting he is gay, and that if a woman comes out as bisexual, she is straight and experimenting for, usually male, attention. Bi-erasure can also take place in academic debate, such as when discussing a famous or historical figure and debating their sexuality. If the debate centers around the figure being straight or gay without considering bisexuality, that is bi-erasure. Bigender. Someone who identifies as two genders. This could be as both male and female, or two genders across the gender spectrum. These identities can be distinct, so the person only experiences one gender at a time, but two genders in total. Or the person could identify as two genders at once. Binary. A system of identification involving only two things. One example is the gender binary, male/man or female/woman. Biphobia. A prejudice against bisexual people. Biromantic. Romantic feelings and the desire to be in a relationship with people of two or more genders. Bisexual. Sexual attraction towards people of two or more genders, either their own gender and others, or multiple genders other than their own. Often used as an umbrella term to include biromanticism, although some bisexual people have sexual urges towards people of multiple genders, but prefer to only be in romantic relationships with people of a specific gender. C. CAFAB. Initialism for coercively assigned female at birth. A lot of terminology is about challenging our assumptions. CAFAB and CAMAB, in the next section, acknowledge that the person isn't able to communicate their gender at birth, and that the choice was made for them without their consent, in this case, incorrectly. This is helpful in shifting the trans narrative from the incorrect changing from one gender to another to expressing your true gender. CAMAB. Initialism for coercively assigned male at birth. Cisgender. A cisgender person is one whose assigned at birth gender matches their gender identity. Using this term avoids establishing a default or normal and acknowledges that everyone has a relationship between their birth gender and gender identification. Closeted, or in the closet. A slang term for when a person identifies as LGBTQ+, but has not shared this aspect of their identity with friends, family, or their wider community. This is sometimes used derogatorily, but there can be many reasons a person chooses to not reveal part of their identity, the key reason being safety. Coming out. When a person shares their LGBTQ+ identity with friends, family, or their wider community. The phrase is thought to have originated in the early 20th century in America. Young upper-class women would be formally presented in society to indicate their families now viewed them as adults. This was referred to as coming out. Originally, the phrase was used by LGBTQ+ people to indicate that they were coming out into gay society or identity. Now, coming out more commonly refers to coming out of the closet. Community. A group who have something in common. Community is an umbrella term for LGBTQ+ people, activists, organizations, and their supporters. Although not all LGBTQ+ people consider themselves as part of the community, generally the community is seen as a supportive environment, encouraging diversity, individuality, identity, and sexuality. Conflate. The combination of two ideas or concepts into one. For example, sexuality and gender are often conflated, although they are separate issues. D. Dead naming. The use of a transgender or genderqueer person's birth name, if they have not kept that name on transitioning. Using the dead name can be hurtful, as it ignores the person's chosen name and often misgenders them. Demigender. An umbrella term for gender identities where someone feels only a partial connection to a gender identity or even gender itself. A person who identifies as demigender may identify with one or more genders. Demi-man. A person whose gender identity is mainly, but not completely, male. Some feel that their identity is also in part another gender. Others identify only with a male gender identity. Demi-romantic. Someone who only feels romantic attraction to people with whom they have formed a strong emotional connection. The demi of demi-romantic and demisexual indicates that the attraction or sexuality is halfway between aromantic/asexual and alloromantic/allosexual. Demisexual. Someone who only feels sexual attraction to people with whom they have formed a strong emotional connection. Here, it seems important to clarify a few things. Many of us live in a society that has a lot of messy assumptions about sex, and particularly in regards to gender. And one of those assumptions might be that it is somehow better to not have sex until you know someone well, regardless of your preference. Of course, it is in fact always better to have sex at the point that you wish to have it, with the person you wish to have it with, and who wishes to have it with you. However, it isn't that demisexuals are choosing to not have sex until they know someone well. They, in fact, do not experience sexual attraction until they have formed an emotional bond with someone. Demi-woman. A person whose gender identity is mainly, but not completely, female. Some feel that their identity is also in part another gender. Others identify only with a female gender identity. DFAB. Initialism, meaning designated female at birth. Similar terms include AFAB, assigned female at birth, and FAAB, female assigned at birth. Diamoric. 1. A person whose gender identity is non-binary and who's attracted to relationships with other non-binary people. 2. A relationship or attraction in which one or more of the participants are non-binary. DMAB. Initialism, meaning designated male at birth. Similar terms include AMAB, assigned male at birth, and MAAB, male assigned at birth. Dysphoria. The feeling of discomfort or unease. Experiences of gender dysphoria aren't always universal. However, one common description people have of gender dysphoria is feeling trapped in a body that doesn't align with their gender identity. E. Enbian. 1. A person whose gender identity is non-binary and who is attracted to relationships with other non-binary people. 2. A relationship or attraction in which all participants are non-binary. NB. Slang for a non-binary person, from the initials NB. Erasure. The total removal of something. The act of ignoring an individual or group's existence or right to exist, or insufficiently representing them or taking them into account, usually as a result of prejudice, whether conscious or unconscious. For example, if you claimed your portrayal of the Stonewall riots was based in reality, but didn't include trans women and LGBTQ+ people of color who were historically recorded as involved, you would be perpetrating an act of erasure against them. Erasure is especially damaging, as it often takes place in media portrayals of society which people often take to be truthful, leading people to believe that minority people really weren't present in these situations, and indeed that certain minorities are barely present in society. F. Female to female. An identifier indicating that a person has transitioned from their assigned birth sex of male to their true gender of female. By using female to female instead of male to female, the person rejects that their gender was ever male. As with abbreviations such as CAMAB, these terminology readjustments help change the trans narrative to something that affirms their identity. Female to male. An identifier indicating that a person has transitioned or is transitioning from their assigned birth sex of female to their true gender of male. Flexible. a suffix usually attached to a gender or sexual identity term, indicating that someone's...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?